Good morning, children. How are you? Welcome back to the History Chapter 7 Weavers, Iron Smelters, and Factory Owners. This is the part 3rd video. The Sword of Tipu Sultan and Wood's Steel. Coming on to the iron and steel, we have Sword of Tipu Sultan is well known and is still preserved and kept in museum in England. This sword was made of wood steel. This wood steel that time was very popular in South India. It basically had very sharp edges with the kind of flowing water part, what was happening, small carbon crystal embedded in the iron during the process of making it. Anglicized version of this word or woods steel was known as ukku in Kannada, hukku in Telugu, and urukku in Malayalam. This steel was made in smelting furnaces, and in this furnace, you had iron that was mixed with charcoal, and this capped in the clay pots under central controlled temperature. This was certain interesting case Michael Faraday, who discovered electricity and electromagnetism and studies nearly for 4 years the properties of wood steel that India had manufacturing during that. There was a specialized techniques of smelting iron and refining it of iron. Smelting iron was predominantly done by male members of the family, and bellowing pumping of air into the furnace for keeping the charcoal burning, that activity was done by women of the family, but slowly and gradually many of the furnace abandoned by the late 19th century. However, the craft of iron and smelting was in decline. In most villages, furnaces fell into disuse and the amount of iron produced came down. Why was this so? One reason was the new forest laws that you have read about in the chapter number 4. The colonial government prevented people from entering the reserve forest. How could the iron smelters find wood for charcoal? Where could they get from iron ore? So, defying forest law, they often entered the forest secretly and collected wood, but they could not sustain their occupation on the basis of for long. So many gave up their craft and looked for other means of livelihood. In some areas, government did grant access to the forest, but the iron smelters had to pay a very high tax to the forest departments for each and every furnace they used. This reduced their income. By the late 19th century, iron and steel was being imported from Britain. Ironsmith in India began using the imported iron to manufacture utensils and implements. So, this inevitably lowered the demand of iron produced by local smelters. Early 20th century, the artisan producing iron and steel faced a new competition. Iron and steel factories come up in India. Now, how iron and steel plant was first established in India? 1904, Charles Weld, an American geologist, and Dorabji Tataji, who was the eldest son of Jamshedji Tata, they traveled to the areas of Chhattisgarh. They were looking for a region for very fine iron ore. They saw numerous aggregates carrying basket loads of iron and moving along. So, communicating with them, got to know Rajhara Hills, finest ores in the world. Now, they wanted to establish an iron ore plant in this region. But the sole problem was this region was very dry and water availability was must to be established of an iron steel industry. So what they did was they established iron and steel on the bank of river Sabaranka, and this plant was known as Tisco. The city around that was named after Jamshedji Tata, and city of Jamshedji which established in 1912. During the time steel that was used was imported from Britain. You have the railways that was developed and numerous expansion took place during that time. After the establishment, First World War broke out. What's happened? British supply was reserved for the war again. Whatever Tisco was producing was mainly the shells and carriages, wheel required for the war. During 1919, 90% of steel that was bought by the colonial government was from India, and this Tata Steel plant became one of the biggest steel industries in the British Empire. And later on, they demanded further expanded, and government production was required for the further development during the industrialization taking place in India. Early years of industrialization in Japan. Japan witnessing industrial revolution. However, Japan was supporting the growth of industries in contrast to India, where the whole idea was expanding the market for colonial goods. Japan was focusing on the development of the industries in 1868 was the period of Meiji Regain, and during that time, Japan was basically industrializing under the Western domination. There was postal service, telegraph, railways, steam engine were developed in Japan. Large industries which established with help of government with the later on move on to private ownerships in India. However, in India, colonial domination was a basic barrier that prevented the growth of industrialization in India. These were some of the key developments. Japan industrialization was important because the development of industries to Japan was linked to the needs of military. So those were two reasons why the industrialization in Japan was much different in industrialization in India taking place in India during that time. So, with this, we covered the whole chapter. Inshallah, we'll meet in the next video with new chapter. Till then, goodbye.